Hello. Oh, let me put these down. Okay. Somehow I managed to do that successfully. So, hello. Welcome back. Let's talk about what I read this month in October. October's not over, but we're going to talk about it anyway because we only have a few days left. All right. So, in the spirit of October, I guess I'm going to start with Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. Victorian Gothic horror novel, whatever you want to call it. Frankenstein is about, well, I'm not going to share what it's about. But it's a good story, and it's not the story that you think. If the only version of Frankenstein you're familiar with are some of the movies that are about, like, a zombie slash pieced together man who goes around pitchforks and fire terrorizing the little village. I'm excited to be reading this. It's a short book. I will be finishing it in October, so I wanted to include it in this video, even though I haven't finished it yet. It is a reread for me. And I really enjoyed it the first time, read it in college, and was very surprised by the story, not just because it was a different story than I thought it was going to be, but because it was just really well done. Another book that I read in October is Lessons in Chemistry. This was a booktube favorite among some people. I was reading it for a book club that I do with some of my friends. It's by Bonnie Gamas, I believe is how you Garmus. There's an R in there. This is a read that I did with friends of mine for our friend book club. We're talking about it in 2 weeks, I believe. So I finished it with plenty of time. Marked the things that I wanted to talk about. Um, this is a book that is based in the 1960s, despite the very modernized looking cover, which I don't know how I feel about because I felt like that was very confusing. And it really just goes into the issues and problems there are with being an educated woman who just wants to work in her career field, STEM, in the 1960s. And contemporary fiction, not my favorite genre, but it was a good book for what it was. My friend said this was one of her favorite books that she's ever read. She tends to really like contemporary fiction, it seems, and so it was fun to just see like what really appeals to her. And I'll be really fascinated to hear um, what she really liked about the book. I thought there were like some really fun, interesting like aspects of the book, but I also thought there were some parts that were just completely unbelievable. Like, really, that happened? Like, come on. Like, there's no magical realism in this. There's no fantasy, but like that would be the only way I'd be able to explain some of the coincidences and other things in this book. So that was probably my biggest complaint about the writing was not like the prose itself, but was just like parts of the storyline and plot were just okay. So that book will be unhauled after we have our book club meeting. I normally wouldn't have bought that, but I think it was like a 32-week wait at my library. And since we didn't plan on reading it sometime next year. So another book that I read this month was She Who Became the Sun by Shelley Parker Chan. This is a fantasy retelling of the rise to power of the Ming Dynasty. One of two books that I read this month that took place in China. Total coincidence, but really fascinating and different time periods in China as well. And just follows the story of a young girl. She starts as a girl and just her growing up. And I'd say this story is really about fate and like who decides our fate or what decides our fate. What role does our fate have in determining who we are and who we become? What role do we have in determining who we are and who we become? Um, so that's really just a fascinating like concept. I'd say even though this technically I think it's classified as a fantasy, to me it felt more like magical realism. Like most of the stuff in the world was real, and there were just a few odd elements here and there of magic or mystical things happening. But there's not like a magic system, at least not that I'm aware of. This is a duology. Again, this you'll see something with my series. I'm not a like I started the series, I must finish this series no matter what happens. I didn't dislike this book, but I didn't love it enough to make me want to read book two, even though it doesn't like it ends, I wouldn't say on a cliffhanger, but it ends like inconclusively. Like so That doesn't bother me. Like, I get it. I can look up the Ming Dynasty and figure out what happened in the end and where these stories overlap. And that's actually the part that it made me the most interested in. So I appreciated it because it made me a little more interested in Chinese history and made me go, okay, if this is a, like a reimagining of the rise to power of the Ming Dynasty, like how'd that actually go? Like, that's what this book made me interested in. If I read the second book, it would probably be an audiobook because then I would probably get through it. There is an audiobook of it, and the audiobook was good. So I'd recommend the audiobook in tandem or separately or whatever, but I would recommend the audiobook. If you like fantasy, I'd maybe recommend this too. It wasn't bad. I wouldn't suggest buying it though. So this will be in the haul. I also read this month Shyamala by Henry Fielding. Shyamala is, this is a two-book bind-up, Joseph Andrews and Shyamala. To understand Shyamala, you kind of need to understand the 18th century British lit. And some of the writing that was happening during the time. Really popular book at the time was Clarissa. Shorter version of Clarissa, if you don't want to read that, because it's a huge, like 1,300 page novel, is Pamela. The book is all told in letters, so is this one. And Pamela is a young lady who is a maid who is writing home to her parents about the experiences that she's having and the struggles that she's having when who becomes the master of the house she lives in falls in lust with her. Lust, not love, lust. And first tries to seduce her so that she'll like just have a fling with him, then tries to seduce her so she'll become his mistress, then just considers just flat out raping her, then decides maybe he'll trick her into marrying her so that it won't be rape, and just has no good intentions towards her. And her struggle based on her class and her position and her parents, and like there's a lot about power struggle in there, about how does she maintain her virtue. The subtitle for Pamela is Virtue Rewarded. And, the reward that she gets from maintaining her virtuous slash virginity is what that means. Um, yeah. And then out of that book being published, like all sorts of crazy things happened. Pamelaist, anti-Pamelist. Somebody did a video on this topic. If you want to know more about that. Um, But one of the sort of anti-Pamelist, if you will, was Henry Fielding, which if you don't know much about him, he was a really popular author at the time. He wrote a lot of satires. He wrote a lot of comedies. He just made fun of everybody. So what did he do? Well, he took Pamela and he rewrote it as Shyamala. So, yeah, it's as ridiculous as you think it might be. Basically, Henry Fielding was like, yeah, it's like that whole story is just fake. Because Samuel Richardson, who wrote Pamela, was like, this is a true story. And I just happened to find these girls' letters and I decided to publish them. Nobody had any problems with that. So Henry Fielding's like, oh, yeah, I have the rest of the letters that she mentions are missing. And the ridiculousness just goes on from there. Like, I mean, in Pamela, everyone's against this girl. In Shyamala, I think she slept with everybody who's against her. Like the whole thing's a sham in Shyamala, and she like her nickname is Sham. She is just trying to get Mr. B, who is the master of the house, to, trick him into marrying her in wily ways. It's a very short book. The majority of this book is notes, and the first book in it, Joseph Andrews, Shyamala, is just 40 pages. It's hilarious, but you're only going to be able to appreciate it if you've read Pamela. There are good audiobooks of both. Highly recommend them. Joseph Andrews, in case you're wondering, is sort of the prequel. It was Henry Fielding because it wasn't enough to poke fun at Pamela by making her Shyamala. He also had to write a book about Pamela's father, Joseph Andrews, and the life and adventures that he got up to. He also talks about her mother in Shyamala. He talks about everybody and makes fun of them all. So if you like a good funny read, Shyamala, highly recommend it. I will be reading Joseph Andrews in the future. So my family book club read for this month was The Heaven and Earth Grocery Store by James McBride. Every month my family picks a book and we read it together and we talk about it on a weekly basis on Zoom. I tab it so that I know what I want to talk about. We usually each assign each other a chapter that we have to, like, we read the whole thing. Well, most of us read the whole thing. But we each get assigned a chapter that we specifically have to summarize, and then we talk about it from there. So this is the second novel that we've read by James McBride. The first one was The Color of Water, which was basically a memoir about his mother. This book, I feel like, is secretly about his mother because he talks about his mother and how she grew up in a small town, I believe in Pennsylvania, and that her father ran a grocery store and his mother, I think, had polio and she had a limp. The woman in here is Jewish in Pennsylvania, runs a grocery store, had polio, has a limp. I don't know. There were just a lot of things that reminded me of that book. I think we read The Color of Water earlier this year, so I was like, are you reading another book about your mother? Yes, yes, he is, in my opinion. The next book I read for October is Do Not Say We Have Nothing. I had to read the title because every time I say it correctly, but it just sounds weird the way it comes out. So anyway, written by Madeline Thane. I don't know how to pronounce her last name. This is the second book that I read this month that was takes place in China. It is literary fiction. It was shortlisted for the Man Booker Prize. In my unhaul videos and other videos, you'll hear about my thoughts about prize-winning books, which is normally I don't end up liking them, especially the Pulitzer Prize winners. I don't know what that is. I want to like them. The storylines sound fascinating. I don't end up liking them. I'm not going to get into it. Anyway, the Booker Prize, same thing. Like some of the Booker Prizes I like, some I don't, but it's always hit or miss for me. But this one was shortlisted and it didn't win, so therefore it's more likely that I would like it. And I did like this book. This was like a 4.5 star for me. I wouldn't recommend it to everybody, but I would recommend it to some people, maybe even most people, especially people who would like to learn more about China and maybe some about Chinese history. This specifically has to do with communism in China and how like some of that movement came about. Like it's not a political book, so it's not about communism. It's really about these two families who live in China at the time that Communist Party is coming to rise and fully develops all the way more or less so up to present day, and about the effect that that revolution has on these families and the things that they lose and the things that they keep. Thus, do not say we have nothing, and it's about how they kind of hold their family lives together, how people and families continue to exist in communist China despite the past, despite the current situation, despite its future, and what people have to do to survive there and to keep the things that are precious to them or not. And it was a very deep, moving book with multiple timelines that were really well interwoven. I really enjoyed this book much more than I thought I would. It was sitting on my bookshelf for quite a while. And I finally picked it up at random out of my TBR jar. I pulled it and picked it up this month, and I really enjoyed it. I was very pleasantly surprised. I think the little things in this book are just so well intertwined, like all the way from the cover and just the formatting of the book. There's pictures in here, surprisingly. There's music notation in here because there's a lot in here about music. Um, it's just like all I can say is it's just a very thoughtfully written book and emotional at the same time. And it's one where like I don't feel like I walked away with like a complete understanding of Chinese history and the Communist Party there and all that kind of stuff, but it made me curious. And I think that's what fiction books are so good at doing is making you want to know more about something that you may otherwise never have thought of. So, yeah, do not say we have nothing. Next book I read was next book, the Cairo trilogy. Specifically, I read in here The Palace Walk. This is a bind up of all three books in the Cairo trilogy. Um, and I did tab this as I was going along. I actually read this book in two completely different sittings, if you will. I started it earlier this year and it was just kind of slow going. Like, I didn't dislike it, I didn't like it. It was just kind of slow going, and I wasn't sure what the point was yet. I put it down and was like, let me try this again at a different time. I picked it back up this month and it clicked. It made sense. It was the right timing. I don't know what. At least Palace Walk is a character study. It's really a characters study where you're really following just this one family. And because of their father, who is very tyrannical, they spend most of their time at home. So it's really a lot about their home life. I should say the book is set in 1920s Egypt. But you're following just this one Egyptian family for the most part, and just their daily life, mainly at home, um, which is just a very interesting perspective that like I've never read or heard of, and I think that's why this is a classic novel. I have an Everyday Man's Library edition, which I love these editions. These are some of my favorite hardbacks. I'll talk about that another time, not now. But um, the reason I say this is a difficult book is because the father is, I'm going to put this down, it's heavy. The father is one of the prominent characters in the book, and he is very difficult. Like, he is tyrannical, he's, I would say, abusive. He is a bigot, he's a womanizer, he is an adulterer, he's just not a nice guy. And it can be hard to read a book where like one of your main characters that you're studying is not a good person. I will say the book does not paint him out to be a good person. Like, there are definitely times where, in the narration, it sort of, I wouldn't say justifies his behavior, but explains it. Like, and particularly from his perspective, explains it. But it will also explain why the family kind of puts up with it. Because the family is aware that he's tyrannical and horrible. The neighbors are aware of it. Like, the book makes no bones about the fact that nobody thinks he treats his family well. But he does have this two-faced part of him where he treats everyone else wonderfully, which I think is even more disgusting. But despite the fact that he is a very difficult character to have to read about, everyone else in the book is so well drawn, so lovely, so interesting. There are small things that are happening in the family. There's like socially the stuff that's politically going on in the background. There's social stuff that's going on. And it's a setting that like I knew nothing about and became very interested in. So as the book went on, um, and where I picked it back up, I really started getting into it. It is a very slow-paced book, so if you don't like slow-paced character studies, this might not be for you. But if you do like that and you want to learn a little bit more about Egypt in the 1920s and family life in a Muslim family, I think this is a good book for that. Do I think this is a good representation of like every Muslim family? No, I think this is a horrible representation. I think the book makes that clear. Like, they are not your typical family. Um, though I think they are a family you could find in that setting. But so I wouldn't say it's like a good representation. I would recommend this to some people, probably not a lot of people. So it's probably more like a 3.5 for me. But I am going to keep it because at least as of right now, I own it and I am interested in reading the next series. There is an audiobook of this. The audiobook is really good as well because it helps with the pronunciation of the names and you get a little bit of like appropriate accenting and stuff and that kind of thing. And that definitely helped. So I will probably be listening to the second book and the third book if I get to it, mainly on audiobook. If I didn't own this and didn't own it in this edition, would I keep reading this? I don't know. Maybe. But I read it for now. The Cairo Trilogy. I read another series this month, and this one was A Pawn of Burning Throne by Ashok K. Banker. And this is a modern Indian fantasy. This was probably really the true fantasy I read this month. I think I mentioned that She Who Became the Sun was also technically a fantasy, but this feels more magical realism to me. This felt like fantasy. Like, there is definitely magic, there are magical elements, there are mystical beings and other kind of stuff, but I'd say it's light fantasy. Like, you're not getting explanations of any of the magical or mystical elements of it. I'd say it's more religiously mystical than magic. Like there's not a hard magic system per se, or at least not that I've seen so far. It's a long book, but this is a very, very fast read, surprisingly. Um, I think it's just the way the pages are formatted. When you have chapters and stuff, you have lots of like half pages, not full. This is an oversized book. It's not a trade paperback. You can see the size difference there. But I would say that like once you take out the margins and then the half pages, that it's the writing probably takes up as much room as the writing in this book. Um, and it's like 600 some odd pages. It does not read like a 600 some odd page book. Like it's well paced. I'd say it's like medium to fast paced. So if the size is concerning you, don't be. It's going to go pretty quick. There is an audiobook available for this on Scribd as well as other places. And I listened to that along with this book, and that also helped it go really fast. The story's pretty straightforward to follow, so it's not like super complicated. You're getting lost. There's a decent number of characters. It is part of the Burning Empire saga. Am I going to continue reading this? Probably not. It was good. It wasn't spectacular. Like, I'm not feeling drawn like, ooh, I need to know what happens next. And that's despite the fact that this does have a, like it's not a wrapped up ending. Like, it is an ending that I wouldn't say leaves you on a cliff. Well, no, as far as things go, it does kind of leave you on a cliffhanger. Like, you do kind of, it does kind of leave you in the place of like, oh, how's this going to be resolved? I don't really care. I hate to say it. I think most people who are like really into series would. Really, what I've learned this year is that I'm not a huge series person. Upon a Burning Throne, read it, wasn't bad. Looking down at the books to see how many I have left. The final book that I read this month, The Tale of Genji, by Murasaki Shikibu. I did not read this entire book. This is 1,300 pages. There's no way that was happening. I started it this month. I will be reading this book for 3 months, so October, November, December. And this is a reread for me. I read this book when I was in high school and really enjoyed it. Don't know how I came across it then. This is a classic of Japanese literature written in the 11th century Japan, I believe, about court life. Murasaki Shikibu was a woman of Japanese high court, and she wrote a story to entertain the other ladies in court about court life. And I think it was court life that was like maybe a decade or so before she was writing. But she wrote this novel. It's basically a novel. Fits pretty well in terms of what we consider novels even today. And she wrote it in Japanese. And yeah, you just learn a lot about court life at that time, culture, what they love, what they consider important, what they consider to not be important, what they love, what they don't love, who they don't love. Genji was born of the emperor, but is not in the line of succession, and he has a lot of romances. He falls in love with pretty much every woman and thinks that the men are so gorgeous that if they were women, he'd probably fall in love with them too. Like he's got a heart for everyone basically, and even if he didn't like you, he could have liked you maybe if given enough time. um there are some definite trigger warnings in this. There is rape in this book, and that needs to be taken into consideration. I think the book does a really good job of expressing when his behavior does not meet the current time's moral standards. In Japan at this time, they were dealing with the Chinese culture being very significant in court life, especially in the court life of men. The sort of difficulties and tensions of interlacing Buddhist practice with Shinto belief, and just beautiful Japanese poetry that just makes you want to go to Japan and sit out in some beautiful garden and listen to water go by and look at leaves. And I mean, if you want to contemplate nature, read The Tale of Genji. It's going to help you do it. Put some good music on and look out your window. There are audiobooks of this, but because of its length, all the audiobooks are abridged, and so I won't be using those because there's no way I am taking the time to figure out where the abridged audiobook is in relation to where I am in this book. I don't have time for that. I could have read some more pages. So I will continue reading this. You'll continue to see this on my TBRs and my wrap ups until it is done. I am enjoying it. And there are some great videos on there on YouTube of other people who have read The Tale of Genji and have done some summaries on it. Yeah, so that's it. I'm not going to try and make that stack and pick it up again, but you saw it at the beginning, hopefully. I think I'm now moving my camera all over the place, so I'm going to stop while I'm ahead. And that's my wrap up for October. Those are all the books that I read. I did unhaul some books and DNF some books. Those will be in a different video. I'm going to do a video about my unhaul bag and my at risk of being unhauled cart. And so I will probably do those soon, but the ones that if I do it soon, I guess I'll include the ones that I unhauled this month in it. What am I even saying? Goodbye. That's what I'm saying. Goodbye. Thank you for watching. Like, subscribe, ring bells, throw candy, share candy. Happy Halloween.